Alright everyone, my name is Banu Kampati and we'll be going over part 6 of Ancient and Modern Ships. So picking off from where we left, so there are more drawings than one in existence, which are supposed to represent the famous warship of the Henry Goss Adu. One of them, shown in figure 41, is from a drawing in the Pepsian Library in Magdalen College of Cambridge. Another is shown in the figure 42, which is from an engraving by Allen of a picture ascribed to Holbein. The two illustrations differ in many important respects and cannot both represent the same ship. There is very little doubt that figure 41 is a more correct representation of the two because it is confirmed in all essential respects by Volpe's picture of the embarkation of Henry VIII at Dover in 1520 on this very ship. Volpe's picture is now at Hampton Court Palace and shows 4 other ships of the Royal Navy, which were all built in the same style as a Pepsian drawing of figure 41, with enormous forecastles and poops. The vessel represented in the picture ascribed to Holbein appears to belong to a later date than 1520, and is in fact transitional between the ships of this period and those of the reign of Elizabeth. One of the warships of the latter period is shown in figure 45. According to a manuscript in the Pepsian collection, the Henry Goss Adu was armed with 21 guns and a multitude of smaller pieces. The numbers of the various guns and the weights of their shot are given in the following table. So the first gun that is named is a cannon, and 4 of them were present, and the weight of the shot that was ascribed to the cannon is 60 pounds. A demi-cannon, there was only 3 present in the Henry Goss Adu, and the weight of their shot was 32. The culverin, there was 4, and their weight of the shot was 18. A demi-culverin, there was only 2 present, with the weight of their shot being 8. A cannon prayer was also present, and there were 2 of them, with their weight of shot being around 26. And a falcon was present, with only 2 present, and their weight of shot was 2. The sizes of the guns of this time are pretty accurately known because one of the ships of Henry VIII, called the Mary Rose, built in 1509, went down off Portsmouth in 1545, and several of her guns have been recovered and are still in existence. The portholes were circular and so small in diameter that no traverse could have been given to the guns. This practice continued to prevail till the time of the Commonwealth. There were 5 masts in this, as in all other first rates henceforth down to the time of Charles I. One of the masts was inclined forward, like a modern bowsprit. Each mast was made in one piece, the introduction of separate topmasts having been a more modern improvement. The highest development in the art of shipbuilding at this period was reached in the large merchant ships called carracks. The competition between the great trading republics of Italy, Venice and Genoa, and the rivalry of Portugal probably accounted for the marked improvement in the character of merchant ships in the 15th and 16th centuries. Figure 43 gives representation of a large Genoese carrack of the 16th century. It will be noticed that this vessel had 4 masts and was square-rigged, the foremost mast having been inclined forward somewhat after the fashion of the modern bowsprit. In the 16th century, the carrack often attained the size of 1,600 tons. Towards the latter half of the century, a Portuguese carrack, captured by the English, was in length from the beakhead to the stern 165 feet, with a beam of 47 feet, a length of the keel at 100 feet, and the height of the mainmast being around 121 feet. The circumference at Partners was 11 feet, and the length of the mainyard was 106 feet. Burton was around 1,600 tons. This vessel carried 32 pieces of brass ordnance, a very necessary addition to the merchant ship of the period, and accommodated between 600 and 700 passengers. The most important maritime event in the 16th century was undoubtedly the fitting out by Spain in 1588 of the gigantic expedition intended to invade this country in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. An account of fleets on either side may therefore be interesting. The Great Armada consisted of no less than 132 vessels, of which only 4 were galleys and 4 were galleasses. Of the remainder, 30 were under 100 tons and 94 were between 130 and 1,550 tons. The total tonnage of the ships, less the galleys and galleasses, was 59,120. The armament consisted of 2,761 guns. The seamen numbered 7,865 and the soldiers 20,671. The fleet was divided into 10 squadrons. The largest vessel was a flagship of the Levant Squadron and was of 1,249 tons and carried 30 guns. The crew consisted of 80 sailors and 344 soldiers. The next largest was of 1,200 tons and carried 47 guns, but the greater number of the vessels were much smaller. The popular belief as to their incredible size and unwieldiness must therefore be dismissed as baseless, for even the largest ships were far exceeded in size by some of the carracks or merchant vessels of that day. On the average, the Spanish vessels mounted 22 guns apiece and carried crews of 231 sailors and soldiers. Figure 44 is a sketch taken from the tapestry of the old House of Lords of one of the galleasses of the fleet. It will be noticed that she carried her guns extremely high, a peculiarity of which was common to many of the Spanish vessels. For we read that their fire did more harm to the rigging than to the hulls of the English vessels. The fleet mustered by Elizabeth was far more numerous, but its tonnage did not amount to one half of that of the Armada. The total number of vessels sailing under the English flag was 197, of which, however, only 34 belonged to the Royal Navy. The remainder were merchant vessels, hastily fitted out and adapted for purposes of war by their owners or by the ports to which they belonged. Of the royal ships, the largest was the Triumph, built in 1561. She was commanded by Sir Martin Frobisher and was only exceeded in size by 4 of the Spanish vessels. The Triumph was between 1,000 and 1,100 tons, but there were only 7 ships in the English Navy of between 600 and 1,000 tons, whereas the Spaniards had no fewer than 45. The crew of the Triumph numbered 500, of whom 300 were sailors, 40 were gunners, and 160 were soldiers. The Triumph carried 42 guns, of which 4 were cannon, 3 were demi-cannon, 17 were culverins, 8 were demi-culverins, 6 were sakers, and 4 small pieces. The greatest number of guns carried by any ship in the fleet was 56, mounted on board the Elizabeth Jones of 900 tons and built in 1559. The flagship of the Lord High Admiral, Lord Howard of Effingham, the Ark, was the most modern of the English warships, and having been built in 1587. She was of 800 tons, carried a crew of 430, and mounted 55 guns. Of the merchant auxiliaries, the 2 largest were the galleon Leicester and the merchant Royale, each of 400 tons, and each carried a crew of 160 men. In the former of these, the explorer Cavendish afterwards made his last voyage. Another of the merchant ships, the Edward Bonaventure, belonged to the Levant Company, and in the years 1591 to 1593 was distinguished as the first English ship that made a successful voyage to India. The size of a large number of the merchant ships was under 100 tons. The total number of the crews of the entire English fleet was 15,551, and of these, 6,289 belonged to the Queen's ships. As a general rule, the English ships in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, both in the Royal Navy and in the mercantile marine, were much inferior in size to the vessels belonging to the great maritime republics of Italy and to Spain and Portugal. Hitherto, the practice had been general of hiring Genoese and Venetian carracks for mercantile purposes. It is stated that about the year 1578, or 20 years after Queen Elizabeth's accession to the throne, there were only 24 ships in the Royal Navy and 135 of above 100 tons burden in the whole kingdom, and but 656 that exceeded 40 tons. Nevertheless, in this reign there was a great development of mercantile activity, in which the sovereign as well as her people participated. Many trading expeditions were sent out to the West Indies and to North America, and warlike descents on the Spanish ports were frequently carried out and were attended with great success. In Elizabeth's time, the first British colony, Virginia, was founded in North America, and Sir Francis Drake undertook his memorable and eventful voyage around the world in a squadron which consisted at the commencement of 5 vessels, whereof the largest, the Pelican, was of only 100 tons burden, and the smallest a pinnace of 15 tons. So great was the progress made about this time in English maritime trade that only 4 years after the date above mentioned, there were said to have been no less than 135 English commercial vessels of above 500 tons in existence. In the year 1587, Drake in his famous marauding expedition in the Spanish seas captured a great carrack called the San Felipe, which was returning home from the East Indies. The papers found in her revealed enormous profits which the Spaniards made out of their trade with India, and afforded such valuable information that the English merchant adventurers were incited to cut in and try to secure some share of this trade for themselves. This led ultimately to the founding of the celebrated East India Company and to the conquest of India by the British. In 1589, certain merchants petitioned the Queen to grant them a license to trade with the East Indies. But Elizabeth, fearing the resentment of the Spanish and Portuguese, would not grant their request for many years, and it was not till the last day of the year 1599 that she gave a charter of incorporation to the Earl of Cumberland and 215 knights and merchants for 15 years, and thus founded the first East India Company. English adventurers, however, did not wait for a charter before commencing their trading operations with the East, for in 1591 an expedition consisting of 3 ships was sent out under the command of James Lancaster. Only one of the 3, the Edward Bonaventure, which as already mentioned, had been a merchant auxiliary in the English fleet that opposed the Armada, ever reached the East Indies in safety. A few weeks after the charter had been granted, Lancaster led another expedition to the east. His fleet consisted of 5 ships. The largest, the Dragon, was of 600 tons and had a crew of 202. After an adventurous voyage, the fleet returned to England in September 1602, having been absent 2 years and 8 months. There is abundant evidence to show that foreign merchant ships in Elizabeth's reign were often much larger than any built in this country. The following are examples. In 1592, a Portuguese carrack called the Madre de Dios was captured and brought home. She was of 1,600 tons burden, 165 feet long from stem to stern, and had 7 decks, including the numerous half and quarter decks which formed the poop. In 1594, a Spanish carrack was destroyed, which had 1,100 men on board. When Cadiz was taken in 1596, 2 Spanish galleons of 1,200 tons were captured, and the flagship, the San Felipe, of 1,500 tons, was blown up. In 1602, a Portuguese carrack of 1,600 tons was captured at Sesimbra. She was named the San Valentino and was worth, with her cargo, 1,000,000 ducats. The system of striking topmasts appears to have been introduced into the English Navy in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. It is mentioned by Sir Walter Raleigh as a recent improvement and a wonderful ease to great ships, both at sea and in the harbor. Amongst the other novelties mentioned by the same authority was the use of chain pumps on board ship. They lifted twice the amount of water and that the old-fashioned pumps could raise. Studding topgallant, sprit, and topsails were also introduced, and the weighing of anchors by means of the capstan. He also alludes to the recent use of long cables and says that by it we resist the malice of the greatest winds that can blow. The early men of war, pierced with portholes, carried their lower guns very near the water. In some cases they were only 14 inches from the lower sill of the portholes to the waterline. This practice led to many accidents. Amongst others may be mentioned the loss of the Mary Rose, one of the largest ships in the Royal Navy in the time of Henry VIII. Sir Walter Raleigh mentions that in his time the practice was introduced of raising the lower tier of ports. Nevertheless, this improvement did not become general till the time of the restoration of Charles II. Figure 45 is a representation of an English ship of war of the time of Queen Elizabeth, supposed to be of the date 1588. It is copied from the tapestries of the old House of Lords. It shows clearly the recently introduced topmast alluded by Sir Walter Raleigh. It is certainly a much more ship-shaped and serviceable craft than the vessels of Henry VIII. There is also in existence a drawing of a smaller Elizabethan warship in the Rawlinson MSS in the Bodleian Library. In essential particulars, it confirms Figure 45. Both of these show that the forecastles and poops had been considerably modified. All right, everyone, that is all for part 6 of Ancient and Modern Ships.